Founding text of transgender studies in academia, with other critical transgender works emerging after it. The essay examines how transgender women have historically been viewed, studied, and treated by the Western medical establishment. In the essay, Stone critiques medical research and theory that deem transgender individuals too illogical or damaged to represent themselves, as well as the institution of passing and its role in the reproduction of binary gender and sexist norms. Stone argues that these societal phenomena have precluded transgender individuals from participating in their own discourse, and bear negative psychic, social, and political consequences. In response, she proposes the formation of a counter-discourse that disrupts binary understandings of gender, thereby allowing transgender individuals to speak as transgender subjects. That sounds really interesting. I really want to read that. The credit is Sandy Stone, Advanced Communication Technologies Laboratory, Department of Radio, Television, and Film of the University of Texas at Austin. Original copyright 1987 by Sandy Stone. I don't know if this is going to give us anything we can use for the document, but it seems kind of interesting. And theory is fun. Frogs into Princesses. The verdant hills of Casablanca look down on the homes and shops, jammed into chock-a-block against narrow, twisted streets, filled with the odors of spices and dung. Casablanca is a very old city, passed over by Lawrence Durrell, perhaps only by a geographical accident, as the winepress of love. In the more modern quarter, located on a broad, sunny boulevard, is the building otherwise unremarkable except for a small brass nameplate that identifies it as the clinic of Dr. George's Bureau. It is predominantly devoted to obstetrics and gynecology, but for many years has maintained another reputation quite unknown to the stream of Moroccan women who pass through its rooms. Dr. Bureau is being visited by journalist James Morris. Morris fidgets in an anteroom reading Elle and Paris Match, with something less than full attention, because he is on an errand of immense personal import. At last the receptionist calls for him, and he is shown to the inner sanctum. He relates, "I was led along corridors and up staircases into the inner premises of the clinic. The atmosphere thickened as we proceeded. The rooms became more heavily curtained, more velvety, more voluptuous. Portrait busts appeared, I think, and there was a hint of heavy perfume. Presently I saw, advancing upon me through the dim alcoves of this retreat, which distinctly suggested to me the allure of a harem, a figure no less recognizably odalisque. It was Madame Bureau. She was dressed in a long white robe, tasseled, I think, around the waist, which subtly managed to combine the luxuriance of a caftan with the hygiene of a nurse's uniform. And she was blonde herself and carefully mysterious. Powers beyond my control had brought me to room 5 at the clinic in Casablanca, and I could not have run away even if I had wanted to. I went to say goodbye to myself in the mirror. We would never meet again, and I wanted to give that other self a long, last look in the eye, and a wink for luck. As I did so, a street vendor outside the played a delicate arpeggio upon his flute, a very gentle, merry sound which he repeated over and over again. In sweet diminuendo down the street. Flights of angels, I said to myself, and so staggered to my bed and oblivion. Exit James Morris. Enter Jan Morris. Through the intervention of the late 20th century medical practices in this wonderfully oriental, almost religious narrative of transformation. The passage is from Conundrum, the story of Morris' sex change and the consequences for her life. Besides the wink for luck, there is another obligatory ceremony, known to male-to-female transsexuals, which is called wringing the turkey's neck. Although it is not recorded whether Morris performed it as well, I will return to this rite of passage later in more detail. 2. Making history. Imagine now a swift segue from the moiling alleyways of Casablanca to the rolling green hills of Palo Alto. The Stanford Gender Dysphoria program occupies a small room near the campus in the quiet residential section of this affluent community. The program, which is a counterpart to George's Bureau's clinic in Morocco, has been for many years the academic focus of Western studies of gender dysphoria syndrome, also known as transsexualism. Here are determined etiology, diagnostic criteria, and treatment. The program was begun in 1968, and its staff of surgeons and psychologists first set out to collect as much history on the subject of transsexualism as was available. Let me pause to provide a very brief capsule of their results. A transsexual is a person who identifies his or her gender identity with that of the opposite gender. Sex and gender are quite separate issues, but transsexuals commonly blur the distinction by confusing the performative character of gender with the physical fact of sex, referring to their perceptions of their situation as being in the wrong body. Although the term transsexual is of recent origin, the phenomenon is not. The earliest mention of something which we can recognize as ex post facto as transsexualism in light of current diagnostic criteria was of the Assyrian king Sardanapalus, who was reported to have dressed in women's clothing and spun with his wives. Later instances of something very like transsexualism were reported by Philo of Judea. During the Roman Empire, in the 18th century, Chevalier d'Eon, who lived for 39 years in the female role, was a rival of Madame Pompadour for the attention of Louis XV. The first colonial governor of New York, Lord Cornbury, came from England fully attired as a woman and remained so during his time in office. Transsexualism was not accorded the status of an official disorder until 1980, when it was first listed in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. As Mary Mell points out, this is something of a Pyrrhic victory. Prior to 1980, much work had already been done in an attempt to define criteria for differential diagnosis. An example from the 1970s is the one from work carried out by Leslie Lothstein and reported in Walter and Ross's Transsexualism and Sex Reassignment. Lothstein, in his study of 10 aging transsexuals, average age 52, found that psychological testing helped to determine the extent of the patient's pathology. He concluded that transsexuals as a class were depressed, isolated, withdrawn, schizoid individuals with profound dependency conflicts. Furthermore, they were immature, narcissistic, egocentric, and potentially explosive, while their attempts to obtain professional assistance were demanding, manipulative, controlling, coercive, and paranoid. Here's another. In a study of 56 transsexuals, the results on the schizophrenia and depression scales were outside the upper limit of the normal range. The authors see these profiles as reflecting the confused and bizarre lifestyles of the subjects. These were clinical studies which represented a very limited class of subjects. However, the studies were considered sufficiently representative for them to be reprinted without comment in the collections, such as that of Walters and Ross. Further on in each paper, though, we find that each investigator invalidates his results in a brief disclaimer which is reminiscent on the fine print in a cigarette ad. In the first by adding, "It must be admitted that Lothstein's subjects could hardly be called a typical sample, as 9 of the 10 studied had serious physical health problems." This was a study conducted in a health clinic, not a gender clinic. And in the second, with the afterthought that 82% of the subjects were prostitutes, and atypical of transsexuals in other parts of the world. Such results might have been considered marginal, hedged about as they were with markers of questionable method or excessively limited samples. Yet they came to represent transsexuals in medico-legal and psychological literature, disclaimers and all, almost to present day. During the same period, feminist theoreticians were developing their own analyses. The issue quickly became and remains volatile and divisive. Let me quote an example. "Rape is a masculinist violation of bodily integrity. All transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the female form to an artifact, by appropriating this body for themselves. Rape, although it is usually done by force, can also be accomplished by deception." This quote is from Janice Raymond's 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire, Making of the She-Male, which occasioned the title of this paper. I read Raymond to be claiming that transsexuals are constructs of an evil, phallocratic empire, and were designed to invade women's spaces and appropriate women's power. Though empire represented a specific moment in feminist analysis, and prefigured the appropriation of liberal political language by a neoliberal right wing. Here in 1991, on the 12th anniversary of its publication, it is still the definitive statement on transsexualism by a genetic female academic. To clarify my stakes in this discourse, let me quote another passage from Empire. "Masculine behavior is notably obtrusive. It is significant that transsexually constructed lesbian feminists have inserted themselves into the positions of importance and/or performance in the feminist community. Sandy Stone, the transsexual engineer with Olivia Records, an all-woman recording company, illustrates this well. Stone is not only crucial to the Olivia enterprise, but plays a very dominant role there. The visibility he achieved in the aftermath of the Olivia controversy only serves to enhance his previously dominant role and to divide women, as men frequently do, when they make their presence necessary and vital to women. As one woman wrote, "I feel raped when Olivia passes off Sandy as a real woman. After all his male privilege, is he going to cash in on lesbian feminist culture too?" This paper, The Empire Strikes Back, is about morality tales and origin myths, about telling the truth of gender. Its informing principle is that technical arts are always imagined to be subordinated by the ruling artistic idea, itself rooted authoritatively in nature's own life. It is about the image, and the real mutually defining each other through inscriptions and reading practices of late capitalism. It is about postmodernism, postfeminism, and, dare I say it, post-transsexualism. Throughout the paper owes a large debt to the work of Donna Haraway. All reality in a late capitalist culture lusts to become an image for its own security. Let's turn to accounts by the transsexuals themselves. During this period, virtually all of the published accounts were written by male to females. I want to briefly consider 4 autobiographical accounts of male to female transsexuals to see what we can learn about what they think they are doing. I will consider female to male transsexuals in another paper. The earliest partially autobiographical account in existence is that Lili Elbe, in Neil Hoy's book Man to Woman, 1933, the first fully autobiographical book was the paperback I Changed My Sex. Not exactly a quiet, contemplative title. written by the striptease artist Hetty Jo Star in the mid-1950s. Christine Jorgensen, who underwent surgery in the early 1950s and is arguably the best known of the recent transsexuals, did not publish her autobiography until 1967. Instead, Starr's book rode the wave of publicity surrounding Jorgensen's surgery. In 1974, Conundrum was published, written by the popular English journalist Jan Morris. In 1977, there was Canary by musician and performer Canary Khan. In addition, many transsexuals keep something they call by the argot term OTF, the obligatory transsexual file. This usually contains newspaper articles and forbidden diary entries about inappropriate gender behavior. Transsexuals also collect autobiographical literature. According to the Stanford Gender Dysphoria Program, the medical clinics do not, because they consider autobiographical accounts to be thoroughly unreliable. Because of this, and since a fair percentage of the literature is invisible to many library systems, these personal collections are the only source for some of this information. I am fortunate to have a few of them at my disposal. What sort of subject is constituted in these texts? Hoye, representing Jacobson, representing Elb, who is representing Wagner, who is representing Spar, writes, "A single glance of this man had deprived her of all her strength. She felt as if her whole personality had been crushed by him. With a single glance he had extinguished it. Something in her rebelled. She felt like a schoolgirl who had received short shrift from an idolized teacher. She was conscious of a peculiar weakness in all her members. It was the first time her woman's heart had trembled before her lord and master, before the man who had constituted himself her protector, and she understood why she then submitted so utterly to him and his will." We can put to this fragment all of the usual questions. Not by whom, but for whom was Lily Elb constructed? Under whose gaze did her text fall? And consequently, what stories appear and disappear in this kind of seduction? Oh, hold on, chat. I'll be right back. Welcome, President Sunday viewers. We are currently reading the Empire, hold on. I don't want to lose my place, so we'll open a new tab. No, I'm here. Squid Gang. Empire Strikes Back, a post-transsexual manifesto. This is, queer literature from the 1980s. We can take a quick look at the summary before we jump back in. We're doing a theory stream. Yeah, this is like a critique of transmed nonsense. It is not itself transmed nonsense, although it's using outdated terminology because it's from the 80s. Stone's essay is considered to be the founding text of transgender studies in academia, with other critical transgender works emerging after it. The essay examines how transgender women have historically been viewed, studied, and treated by the Western medical establishment. Hey, hello, squids. This is a safe space for all sea creatures. And yeah, this stream is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends. Okay, we continue. can put this fragment of all the usual questions, not by whom but for whom was Lily Elbe constructed? Under whose gaze did her text fall? And consequently, what stories appear and disappear in this kind of seduction? It may come as no surprise that all of the accounts I will relate here are similar in their description of woman as male fetish, as replicating a socially enforced role, or as constituted by performative gender. Lily Elbe faints at the sight of blood. Jan Morris, a world-class journalist who has been around the block a few times, still describes her sense of herself in relation to makeup and dress, of being on display, and is pleased when men open doors for her. I feel small and neat. I am not small, in fact, and not terribly neat either, but femininity conspires to make me feel so. My blouse and skirt are light, bright, crisp. My shoes make my feet look more delicate than they are, besides giving me a suggestion of vulnerability that I rather like. My red and white bangles give me a racy feel. My bag matches my shoes and makes me feel well organized. When I walk out into the street, I feel consciously ready for the world's appraisal, in a way that I never felt as a man. Hetty Joestar was a professional stripper, says in I Changed My Sex, I wanted the sensual feel of lingerie against my skin. I wanted to brighten my face with cosmetics. I wanted a strong man to protect me. Here in 1991, I have also encountered a few men who are brave enough to echo this sentiment for themselves. But in 1955, it was a proprietary feminine position. Besides the obvious complicity of these accounts in a Western white male definition of performative gender, the authors also reinforce a binary opposition mode of gender identification. They go from being unambiguous men, albeit unhappy men, to unambiguous women. There is no territory in between. Further, each constructs a specific narrative moment when their personal sexual identification changes from male to female. This moment is the moment of their neocolporaphy, that is, of gender reassignment or sex change surgery. Jan Morris, on the night preceding surgery, wrote, I went to say goodbye to myself in the mirror. We would never meet again, and I wanted to give that other self a last wink for luck. Canary Khan writes, I am not a muchacho. I am a muchacho now, a girl. Hetty Joestar writes, in the instant I awoke from the anesthetic, I realized I had finally become a woman. Even Lily Elbe, whose text is secondhand, used the same terms. Suddenly it occurred to him that he, Andreas Spar, was probably undressing for the last time, immediately on awakening from the first stage surgery, castration in Hoye's account. Spar writes a note. He gazed at the card and failed to recognize the writing. It was a woman's script. Inger carries the note to the doctor. What do you think of this, doctor? No man could have written it. No, said the astonished doctor. No, you are quite right. An exchange which requires the reader to forget that orthography is an acquired skill. The same thing happens with Elbe's voice. The strange thing was that your voice had completely changed. You have a splendid soprano voice, simply astounding. I just lost my place. There we go. Perhaps as astounding now as then, but for different reasons, since in light of present knowledge of the effects, and more to the point the non-effects of castration and hormones, none of this could have happened. Neither has any effect on voice timbre. Hence, incidentally, the jaundiced eyes with the clinics regard historical accounts. If Hoye mixes reality with fantasy and caricatures, his subjects, besides simply astounding, what lessons are there in man into woman? Partly what emerges from the book is how Hoye deploys the strategy of building barriers within a single subject, strategies that are still gainful still in gainful employment today. Lily displaces the interruptive masculine self, still dangerously present within her, onto the god figure of her surgeon-therapist, Werner Krautz, whom she calls the Professor or the Miracle Man. The Professor is he who molds Lily, and that which is molded. What the Professor is now doing with Lily is nothing less than an emotional molding, which is preceding the physical molding into a woman. Hitherto, Lily has been like clay, which others had prepared and into which the Professor has given form and life. By a single glance, the Professor awoke her heart to life, a life with all the instincts of a woman. The female is immanent, the female is bone deep, the female is instinct. With Lily's eager complicity, the Professor drives a massive wedge between the masculine and the feminine within her. In this passage, reminiscent of the oriental quality of Morris's narrative, the male must be annihilated, or at least denied, but the female is that which exists to be continually annihilated. Yeah, it does sound like a religious conversion thing. It seemed to her as if she no longer had any responsibility for herself, for her fate. For Werner Krautz had relieved her of it all, nor had she any longer a will of her own. There could be no past for her. Everything in the past belonged to a person who was dead. Now there was only a perfectly humble woman, who was ready to obey, who was happy to submit herself to the will of another, her master, her creator, her professor. Between Andreas and her stood Werner Krautz. She felt secure and salvaged. Yeah, this text is critiquing these accounts and the past approach prior to like the 80s of the medical perspective towards trans people. Is basically a critique of transmedicalism, like from the 80s. Hoye has the same problems with purity and denial of mixture that reoccur in many transsexual autobiographical narratives. The characters in his narrative exist in an historical period of enormous sexual repression. How is one to maintain the divide between the male self, whose proper object of desire is woman, and the female self, whose proper object of desire is man? As a man, you have always seemed to me unquestionably healthy. I have indeed seen with my own eyes that you attract women, and that is the clearest proof that you are a genuine fellow. He paused and then placed his hand on Andrea's shoulder. You won't take it amiss if I ask you a frank question. Have you at any time been interested in your own kind? You know what I mean. Andreas shook his head calmly. My word on it, Niels. Never in my life. And I can add that those kinds of creatures have never shown any interest in me. Good, Andreas. That's just what I thought. Hoye must separate the subjectivity of Andreas, who has never felt anything for men, and Lily, who, in the course of the narrative, wants to marry one. This salvaging procedure makes the world safe for Lily by erecting and maintaining an impenetrable barrier between her and Andreas. Reinforced again and again, in such ways as two different handwriting styles and different voices. The force of an imperative, a natural state towards which all things tend to deny the potentialities of mixture, acts to preserve pure gender identity. At the dawn of the Nazi-led love affair with purity, no creatures will tempt Andreas into transgressing boundaries with his own kind. I will honestly and plainly confess to you, Niels, that I've always been attracted to women, and day to day as much as ever, a most banal confession. Yeah, Andreas would be Lily's dead name. And we don't We don't know how much of this is fiction, or like how much of this account is just being made up whole cloth. As far as I understand. Because this just seems like a fantasy of the author almost. Where were we? But now only so long as the person inside Andreas' body who voices it is Andreas rather than Lily. There is a lot of work being done in this passage, a microcosm of the work it takes to maintain the polar persona in society in the large. Further, each of these writers constructs his or her account as a narrative of redemption. There is a strong element of drama, of the sense of struggle against huge odds, overcoming perilous obstacles, and the mounting awe and mystery at the breathtaking approach and the final apotheosis of the forbidden transformation. Oh boy. The first operation has been successful beyond all expectations. Andreas has ceased to exist, they said. His germ glands, oh mystic words, have been removed. Oh mystic words. The mysterium tremendum of deep identity hovers about a physical locus, the entire complex of male engenderment. The mysterious power of the man-god inhabits the germ glands, in the way that the soul was thought to inhabit the pineal. Maleness is in the you-know-whats. For that matter, so is the ontology of the subject, and therefore Hoye can demonstrate in the coarsest way that femaleness is lack. The operation which has been performed here, that is, castration, enables me to enter the clinic for women, exclusively for women. On the other hand, either Niels or Lily can be constituted by an active insinuation, what the New Testament calls enduin, or the putting on of the god, inserting the physical body within a shell of cultural signification. Andreas Spar was possibly undressing for the last time. For a lifetime, these coverings of coat and waistcoat and trousers had enclosed him. It is now Lily who is writing to you. I am sitting up in my bed in a silk nightdress, with lace trimming, curled, powdered, with bangle, necklace, and rings. All these authors replicate the stereotypical male account of the constitution of women: dress, makeup, and delicate fainting at the sight of blood. Each of these adventurers passes directly from one pole of sexual experience to the other. If there is any intervening space in the continuum of sexuality, it is invisible, and nobody ever mentions wringing the turkey's neck. No wonder feminist theorists have been suspicious. Hell, I'm suspicious. How do these accounts converse with the medical psychological texts? In a time in which more interactions occur through texts, computer conferences and electronic media than by personal contact, the close of the mechanical age and the inception of the virtual, in which multiplicity and prosthetic social communication are common, and consequently when individual subjectivity can be constituted through inscription more often than through personal association. There are still moments of embodied natural truth that cannot be avoided. In the time period of most of these books, the most critical of these moments was the intake interview at the gender dysphoria clinic, when the doctors, who were all males, decided whether the person was eligible for gender reassignment surgery. The origin of the gender dysphoria clinics is a microcosmic look at the construction of criteria for gender. The foundational idea for the gender dysphoria clinics was, first, to study an interesting and potentially fundamental human aberration. Second, to provide help, as they understood the term, for a correctable problem. Some of the early non-academic gender dysphoria clinics performed surgery on demand, which is to say regardless of any judgment on the part of the clinic staff regarding what came to be called appropriateness to the gender of choice. When the first academic gender dysphoria clinics were started on an experimental basis in the 1960s, the medical staff would not perform surgery on demand because of the professional risks involved in performing experimental surgery on, quote, sociopaths. At the time, there was no official diagnostic criteria. Transsexuals were, ipso facto, whoever signed up for assistance. Professionally, this was a dicey situation. It was necessary to construct the category transsexual along customary and traditional lines, to construct plausible criteria for acceptance into a clinic. Professionally speaking, a test or a differential diagnosis was needed for transsexualism that did not depend on anything as simple and subjective as feeling that one was in the wrong body. The test needed to be objective, clinically appropriate, and repeatable. But even after considerable research, no simple and unambiguous test for gender dysphoria syndrome could be developed. The Stanford Clinic was in the business of helping people, among its other agendas, as its members understood the term. Therefore, the final decisions of eligibility for gender reassignment were made by the staff on the basis of an individual's sense of the appropriateness of the individual to their gender of choice. The clinic took on the additional role of the grooming clinic, or charm school, because according to the judgment of the staff, the men who presented as wanting to be women didn't always behave like women. Stanford recognized that gender roles could be learned to an extent. Their involvement with the grooming clinics was an effort to produce not simply anatomically legible females, but women, i.e. gendered females. As Norman Fiske remarked, "I now admit very candidly that in the very early phases we were avowedly seeking candidates who would have had the best chance for success. In practice, this meant that the candidates for surgery were evaluated on the basis of their performance in the gender of choice. The criteria constituted a fully acculturated, consensual definition of gender. At the site of their enactment, we can locate an actual instance of the apparatus of the production of gender." So basically they were doing gender auditions, like for an acting role or something. Yeah, I hate this too. But, you know, history isn't always fun. This raises several sticky questions. The chief two being, who is telling the story for whom? And how do the storytellers differentiate between the story they tell and the story they hear? One answer is they differentiate with great difficulty. The criteria which researchers developed and then applied were defined recursively through a series of interactions with the candidates. The scenario worked this way. Initially, the only textbook on the subject of transsexualism was Harry Benjamin's definitive work, The Transsexual Phenomenon. Note that Benjamin's book actually postdates I Changed My Sex by about 10 years. When the first clinics were constituted, Benjamin's book was the researcher's standard reference. And when the first transsexuals were evaluated for their suitability for surgery, their behavior matched up gratifyingly with Benjamin's criteria. The researchers produced papers which reported on this and which were used as a basis for their funding. It took a surprisingly long time, several years, for the researchers to realize that the reason the candidates' behavioral profiles matched Benjamin's so well was that the candidates too had read Benjamin's book, which was passed from hand to hand within the transsexual community, and they were only too happy to provide the behavior that led to the acceptance for surgery. This sort of careful repositioning created interesting problems. Among them was the determination of the possible range of expressions of physical sexuality. This was a large gray area in the candidates' self-presentations because Benjamin's subjects did not talk about any erotic sense of their own bodies. Consequently, nobody else who came to the clinics did either. By textual authority, physical men who lived as women and who identified themselves as transsexuals, as opposed to male transvestites for whom erotic penile sensation was permissible, could not experience penile pleasure. Into the 1980s, there was not a single preoperative male to female transsexual for whom data was available who experienced genital sexual pleasure while living in the gender of choice. The prohibition continued to be post-operatively in interesting transmuted form, and remained so absolute that no post-operative transsexual would admit to experience transsexual pleasure through masturbation either. Full membership into the assigned gender was conferred by orgasm, real or faked, accomplished through the heterosexual penetration. Wringing the turkey's neck, the ritual of penile masturbation just before surgery, was the most secret of traditions. To acknowledge so natural a desire would be to risk crash landing, that is, role inappropriateness, leading to disqualification. Literally not allowed to experience sexual pleasure, because at risk of being considered like an autogynephile. Sickening. It was necessary to retrench the two groups. On one hand, the researchers, and on the other hand, the transsexuals, were pursuing separate ends. The researchers wanted to know what this thing they called gender dysphoria syndrome was. They wanted a taxonomy of symptoms, criteria for differential diagnosis, procedures for evaluation, reliable courses of treatment, and thorough follow-up. The transsexuals wanted surgery. They had very clear agendas regarding their relation to the researchers, and considered the doctor's evaluation criteria merely another obstacle in their path, something to overcome. In this, they unambiguously expressed Benjamin's original criterion in its simplest form, the sense of being in the wrong body. This seems a recipe for an uneasy, adversarial relationship, and it was. It continues to be, although with the passage of time there has been considerable dialogue between the two camps. Partly, this has been made possible by the realization among the medical and psychological community that the expected criteria for differential diagnosis did not emerge. Consider this excerpt from a paper by Mary Mell written in 1986. There is no mental nor psychological test which successfully differentiates the transsexual from the so-called normal population. There is no more psychopathology in the transsexual population than in the population at large, although the societal response to the transsexual does pose some insurmountable problems. The psychodynamic history of transsexuals do not yield any consistent differentiation characteristics from the rest of the population. These two accounts, Mell's statement and that of Lothstein, in which he found transsexuals to be depressed, schizoid, manipulative, controlling, and paranoid, coexist within a span of less than 10 years. Estelle says, "Oh yeah, that's the problem when you look at the phenomenon from this perspective. You have hacks who write on things when they have a very naive idea. They're treated with the authority on that subject to gatekeep treatment. Some people adopt the injustice to get the outcome they want." Yeah. Yeah, it creates perverse incentives. It's like an adversarial relationship. With the achievement of a diagnostic category in 1980, one which after years of research did not involve much more than the original sense of being in the wrong body, and consequent acceptance by the body police, i.e. the medical establishment, clinically good histories now exist of transsexuals in areas as widely dispersed as Australia, Sweden, Czechoslovakia, Vietnam, Singapore, China, Malaysia, India, Uganda, Sudan, Tahiti, Chile, Borneo, Madagascar, and the Aleutians? This is not a complete list. It is a considerable stretch to fit them all into some plausible theory. Were there undiscovered or untried diagnostic techniques that would have differentiated transsexuals from the normal population? Were the criteria wrong, limited, or short-sighted? Did the realization that criteria weren't emerging just naturally appear as a result of scientific progress, or were there other forces at work? This really is, yeah. It's kind of showing how the pursuit of trying to pathologize and to problematize being trans is in itself just going to be fraught with these problems, and is always going to create this kind of relationship and create these kind of incentives. Such a banquet of data creates its own problems. Concomitant with the dubious achievement of a diagnostic category is the inevitable blurring of boundaries, as a vast heteroglossic account of difference, heretofore invisible to the legitimate professions, suddenly achieves canonization and simultaneously becomes homogenized to satisfy the constraints of the category. Suddenly, the old morality tale of truth and gender, told by a kindly white patriarch in New York in 1966, becomes pan-cultural in the 1980s. Emergent polyvocalities of lived experience, never represented in the discourse, but present at least in potential, disappear. The Berdache and the stripper, the Tweety housewife and the Mujerado, the Mahou and the rock star are still the same story after all, if only we try hard enough. 3. Whose story is this anyway? I wish to point out the broad similarities in which this peculiar juxtaposition suggests to aspects of colonial discourse with which we may be familiar. The initial fascination with the exotic extending to professional investigators, denial of subjectivity and lack of access to the dominant discourse, followed by a species of rehabilitation. Raising these issues has complicated life in the clinics. Making history, whether autobiographic, academic, or clinical, is partly a struggle to ground an account in some natural inevitability. Bodies are screens on which we see projected the momentary settlements that emerge from ongoing struggles over beliefs and practices within the academic and medical communities. These struggles play themselves out in arenas far removed from the body. Each is an attempt to gain a high ground which is profoundly moral in character, to make an authoritative and final explanation for the way things are, and consequently for the way they must continue to be. In other words, each of these accounts is culture speaking with the voice of an individual. The people who have no voice in this theorizing are the transsexuals themselves. As with males theorizing about women from the beginning of time, theorists of gender have been transsexuals possessing something less than agency. As with genetic women, transsexuals are infantilized, considered too illogical or irresponsible to achieve true subjectivity, or clinically erased by diagnostic criteria. Or else, as constructed by some radical feminist theorists, as robots of insidious and menacing patriarchy, an alien army designed and constructed to infiltrate, pervert, and destroy true women. In this construction as well, the transsexuals have been resolutely complicit by failing to develop an effective counter-discourse. Here on the gender borders, at the close of the 20th century, with the faltering of phallocratic hegemony and the bumptious appearance of heteroglossic origin accounts, we find the epistemologies of white male medical practice, the rage of radical feminist theories, and the chaos of lived gendered experience meeting on the battlefield of the transsexual body, a hotly contested site of cultural inscription, a meaning machine for the production of the ideal type. Representation at its most magical, the transsexual body is perfected memory inscribed with the true story of Adam and Eve, as the ontological account of irreducible difference. an essential biography which is a part of nature, a story which culture tells itself. The transsexual body is a tactile politics of reproduction, constituted through textual violence. The clinic is a technology of inscription. Given this circumstance, in which a minority discourse comes to ground in the physical, a counter-discourse is critical. But it is difficult to generate a counter-discourse. If one is programmed to disappear, the highest purpose of the transsexual is to erase his or herself, to fade into the normal population as soon as possible. Part of this process is known as constructing a plausible history, learning to lie effectively about one's past. What is gained is acceptability in society. What is lost is the ability to authentically represent the complexities and ambiguities of lived experience, and thereby is lost that aspect of nature which Donna Haraway theorizes as coyote, the Native American spirit animal who represents the power of continual transformation, which is the heart of engaged life. Instead, the authentic experience is replaced by a particular kind of story, one that supports the old constructed positions. This is expensive and profoundly disempowering. Whether desiring to do so or not, transsexuals do not grow up in the same way as GGs or genetic naturals. Transsexuals do not possess the same history as genetic naturals and do not share common oppression prior to gender reassignment. I am not suggesting a shared discourse. I am suggesting that in the transsexual's erased history, we can find a story disruptive to the accepted discourses of gender, which originates from within the gender minority itself, and which can make common cause with other oppositional discourses. But the transsexual currently occupies a position which is nowhere, which is outside the binary of oppositions of gender discourse. For a transsexual as a transsexual, to generate a true, effective, and representational counter-discourse is to speak from outside the boundaries of gender, beyond the constructed oppositional nodes which have been predefined as the only positions from which discourse is possible. How then can the transsexual speak? If the transsexual were to speak, what would he or she say? 4. A post-transsexual manifesto. To attempt to occupy a place as a speaking subject within the traditional gender frame is to become complicit in the discourse which one wishes to deconstruct. Rather, we can seize upon the textual violence inscribed in the transsexual body and turn it into a reconstructive force. Let me suggest a more familiar example. Judith Butler points out that the lesbian categories of butch and femme are not simple assimilations of lesbianism back into the terms of heterosexuality. Rather, Butler introduces the concept of cultural intelligibility and suggests that the contextualized and resinified. I'm like having a brain fart on that word.
Resignify.
Yeah, of course. Resignified masculinity of the butch seen against a culturally intelligible object of desire. She points out that this way of thinking about gendered objects of desire emits of much greater complexity than that of the example suggests. The lesbian butch or femme both recall the heterosexual scene but simultaneously displace it. The idea that butch and femme are replicas or copies of heterosexual exchange underestimates the erotic power of their internal dissonance. Yeah, I think Gender Trouble was written after this. In the case of the transsexual, the varieties of performative gender seen against a culturally intelligible and gendered body, which is itself a medically constituted textual violence, generate new and unpredictable dissonances, which implicate entire spectra of desire. In the transsexual as text, we may find the potential to map the refigured body into a conventional gender discourse and thereby disrupt it, to take advantage of the dissonances created by such a juxtaposition to fragment and reconstitute the elements of gender into new and unexpected geometries. I suggest we start by taking Raymond's accusation that transsexuals divide women beyond itself, and turn it into a productive force to multiplicatively divide the old binary discourses of gender, as well as Raymond's old monistic discourse. Yeah, we could... I do want to take a look at Gender Trouble. I'm not... How long is Gender Trouble? Also, can I read that on stream? Is it copyright? This is, like, actually free... Like, this is public... Not public domain, but it's, I'm allowed to read it if I attribute it. I don't want to, like, read something that's not, freely available. I lost my place. I'll just continue from here. In the case of the transsexual, the varieties of performative gender seen against a culturally intelligible gender body, which is itself medically constituted textual violence, generate new and unpredictable dissonances, which implicate entire spectra of desire. In the transsexual as text, we may find it the potential to map the refigured body onto conventional gender discourse and thereby disrupt it, to take advantage of the dissonances and created by such a juxtaposition to fragment and reconstitute the elements of gender in new and unexpected geometries. I suggest we start by taking Raymond's accusation that transsexuals divide women beyond itself, and turn it into a productive force to multiplicatively divide the old binary discourses of gender as well as Raymond's old monistic discourse. To the foreground, the practices of inscription and reading, which are a part of this deliberate invocation of dissonance. I suggest constituting transsexuals not as a class or problematic third gender, but as a genre, a set of embodied text whose potential for productive disruption of structured sexualities and spectra of desire has yet to be explored. Okay, I'll look into it if I can cover Gender Trouble on stream. That might be fun to do. In order to effect this, the genre of visual transsexuals must grow by recruiting members from the class of invisible ones, from those who have disappeared into their plausible histories. The most critical thing a transsexual can do, the thing that constitutes success, is to pass. Passing means to live successfully in the gender of choice, to be accepted as a natural member of that gender. Passing means the denial of mixture. One and the same with passing is effacement of the prior gender role, or the construction of a plausible history. Considering that most transsexuals choose reassignment in their third or fourth decade, this means erasing a considerable portion of their personal experience. It is my contention that this process, in which both the transsexual and the medico-legal and psychological establishment are complicit, forecloses the possibility of a life grounded in the intertextual possibilities of the transsexual body. To negotiate the troubling and productive multiple permeabilities of boundary and subject position that intertextuality implies, we must begin to rearticulate the foundational language by which both sexuality and transsexuality are described. For example, neither the investigators nor the transsexuals have taken the step of problematizing wrong body as an adequate descriptive category. In fact, wrong body has come virtually by default to define the syndrome. It is quite understandable, I think, that a phase whose lexicality suggests the phallocentric, binary character of gender differentiation should be examined with deepest suspicion. So long as we, whether academics, clinicians, or transsexuals, ontologize both sexuality and transsexuality in this way, we have foreclosed the possibility of analyzing desire and motivational complexity in a manner which adequately describes the multiple contradictions of individual lived experience. We need a deeper analytical language for transsexual theory, one which allows for the sorts of ambiguities and polyvocalities which have already so productively informed and enriched feminist theory. Okay, yeah, we could talk on VC after. I want to make it through this first. Judith Shapiro points out that to those who might be inclined to diagnose the transsexual's focus on the genitals as obsessive or fetishistic, the response is that they are in fact simply conforming to their culture's criteria for gender assignment. Emphasis mine. This statement points to deeper workings, to hidden discourses, and experimental pluralities within the transsexual monolith. They are not yet clinically or academically visible, and with good reason. For example, in pursuit of differential diagnosis, a question sometimes asked of a prospective transsexual is, suppose that you could be a man or woman in every way except for your genitals. Would you be content? There are several possible answers, but only one is clinically correct. Small wonder, then, that so much of these discourses revolves around the phase wrong body. Under the binary phallocentric founding myth, which Western bodies and subjects are authorized, only one body per gendered subject is right. All other bodies are wrong. As clinicians and transsexuals continue to face off across the diagnostic battlefield, which this scenario suggests, the transsexuals for whom gender identity is something different from and perhaps irrelevant to physical genitalia are occulted by those for whom the power of the medical/psychological establishments and their ability to act as gatekeepers for cultural norms is the final authority for what counts as culturally intelligible body. This is a treacherous area, and were the silenced groups to achieve voice, we might well find, as feminist theorists have claimed, that the identities of individual embodied subjects were far less implicated in physical norms and far more diversely spread across rich and complex structuration of identity and desire than is now possible to express. And yet, even in the best of the current debates, the standard mode is one of relentless totalization. Consider the most perspicuous example in this paper, Raymond's stunning all transsexuals rape women's bodies. What if she had said all blacks rape women's bodies? For all its egregious and inexcusable bigotry, the language of her book is only marginally less totalizing than Gary Cate's transsexuals take on an exaggerated and stereotypical female role, or Anne Boleyn's transsexuals try to forget their male history. Both Cate's and Boleyn's studies are, in most respects, excellent work, and were published in the same collection as an earlier version of this essay. But still there are no subjects in these discourses, or only homogenized, totalized subjects, fractally replicating earlier histories of minority discourses in the large. So when I speak the forgotten word, it will perhaps wake memories of other debates. The word is some. Transsexuals who pass seem able to ignore the fact that by creating totalized monistic identities, forgoing physical and subjective intertextuality, they have foreclosed the possibility of authentic relationships. Under the principle of passing, denying the destabilizing power of being read, relationships begin as lies, and passing, of course, is not an activity restricted to transsexuals. This is familiar to the person of color whose skin is light enough to pass as white, or to the closet gay or lesbian, or to anyone who has chosen invisibility as an imperfect solution to personal dissonance. Essentially, I am re-articulating one of the arguments for solidarity which has been developed by gays, lesbians, and people of color. The comparison extends further. To deconstruct the necessity for passing implies that transsexuals must take responsibility for all their history, to begin to re-articulate their lives not as a series of erasures, in service of a species of feminism conceived from within a traditional frame, but as a political action begun by reappropriating difference and reclaiming the power of the refigured and reinscribed body. The disruptions of old patterns of desire that multiple dissonances of the transsexual body imply produce not an irreducible alterity, but a myriad of alterities, whose unanticipated juxtapositions hold what Donna Haraway called the promises of monsters, physicalities of constantly shifting figure and ground that exceed the frame of any possible representation. The essence of transsexualism is the act of passing. A transsexual who passes is obeying the Derridian imperative. Genres are not to be mixed. I will not mix genres. I could not ask a transsexual for anything more inconceivable than to forgo passing, to be consciously read, to read oneself aloud, and by this troubling and productive reading to begin to write oneself into the discourses by which one has been written, in effect then to become, look out, dare I say it again, post-transsexual. Still, transsexuals know that silence could be an extremely high price to pay for acceptance. I want to speak directly to the brothers and sisters who may read, or quote, read this and say, I ask all of us to use the strength which brought us through the effort of restructuring identity, and which has also helped us to live in silence and denial, for revisioning our lives. I know you feel that most of the work is behind you, and that the price of invisibility is not great, but although individual change is the foundation of all things, it is not the end of all things. Perhaps it's time to begin laying the groundwork for the next transformation. Afterward. In the brief time, or so it seems, since this essay was first written, the situation on the street with regard to articulating a specifically transgendered positionality and within the academy vis-a-vis theory has deeply changed and continues to evolve. Whether the original Empire paper had the privilege of being a fortunately timed bellwether, or whether it successfully evoked the build attend, they will come principle, build it and they will come principle is unknown. But the results are no less gratifying for lack of that knowledge. Transgender, and for that matter post-transgender theory, would appear to be successfully engaging in the nascent discourses of queer theory in a number of graceful and mutually productive respects. And this is the reason for that guarded celebration. Needless to say, however, beginnings are most delicate and critical periods in which, while the foundation stones are still exposed, it is necessary to pay exquisite attention to detail. For this author, it is a most promising and interesting time in which to be alive and writing. We did it! Alright, I'm going to link it one more time in chat. That was The Empire Strikes Back, a Posttranssexual Manifesto. It's a critical look at the history of how trans people were treated by the medical industry and how the medicalization of trans people creates perverse incentives which can produce an adversarial relationship between the medical industry and trans people themselves. Thank you, Pippa. No, it's not bad to want to pass. So I'm gonna need to think on that because that was pretty deep, and I think some of it was a little bit over my head. I'll probably have to read it again, but I think it was saying that like the expectation to pass was harmful. What's your take, Estelle? Like, do you think I'm reading that right? It's bad to be required to pass. Yeah. That it's creates like long-term damage towards trans people as a whole. Yeah. I think that's what was being critiqued. I'm definitely going to read it again on my own time. I really want to take a look at Judith Butler in the future, but that was pretty dense for one night.
Oh,
Hello.
well, I am. Uh, do you want me to present myself?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, introduce yourself for chat.
Yeah, I am Estelle or Gabriel. Like Gabriel's my well, my old name that I feminized temporarily. Anyway, okay, so I don't really have any formal training. I'm not I studied a little bit in college on uh, software engineering, but uh, well, that's unrelated to the subject at hand. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think to go to the essay, I think the perspective that uh, you should take from that essay would be that the studies that seem to prove that trans people are like this or like that seek to uh that seek to prove that some commonality among trans people that could that uh, like you should look at those very carefully because as the essay proves, if those works that treat of trans people, they are not done like from they are not like taking into account the actual perspective of trans people. They well, even then, like they would be used prescriptively to gatekeep care, and
Yeah.
it will create a circle where the studies are like the work made by hacks like uh what's his name the the guy who not invented but he's the autogynephilia guy
Blanchard?
yeah, Blanchard.
Yeah.
Like it creates a circle where those standards are written by hacks and trans people want to get the treatment uh, uh, whether like at any cost, and so they will like adapt to what's been written about them to the specialists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, so like it creates a circle of like confirmation, not confirmation bias, because like it's not like it's more like the perspective of the specialist will be fundamentally undermined because there's an adversarial relationship
Yeah,
that
there's like an antagonism between the two things. It's almost like it's almost like a class antagonism.
Uh, yeah, if
in kind
you
of a way.
want to put it like that. Um, like because the trans person will want the treatment no matter what,
Yeah.
and the specialist's job is to deny them on arbitrary grounds.
Yeah.
And so uh, it makes all uh, uh, all kinds of gatekeeping of like, do you act the right way? It makes all of those extremely moot. Like you basically you're asking people to act the gatekeeping because more of a guide of how to act trans
Hmm.
rather than something to filter out any kind of real transness.
Yeah, the incentives of like the researchers conflict with the incentives of like the subjects,
Yeah. Uh,
which
like
undermines the
if
research and undermines
yeah,
the interests of the subjects.
yeah, and if you because the specialists don't have like the people who the gender specialists, the one who prescribe the medication, the surgeries and everything, because they don't really have uh any deeper perspective, any deeper access to the people uh they deal with. They uh like they can't actually decide whether someone is acting trans or is really trans.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like
So,
they're trying to define like some kind of test for something that we don't even know if you could test for. For all we know, we can't. It,
well, it's more of a like it's more of a uh epistemological issue, so to speak. Like
mm-hmm.
there's no one that can get into your head other than the person that the head constitutes. And so yeah, it just makes transmedicalism uh, a bunch of, well, like it uh, like you could say that their pretensions are nonsensical, like the but if you look at it like some sort of, okay, I have like if trans medicalists are conscious of that fact of like how uh like have of like the folly of their uh pretensions,
Mm-hmm.
um like they would they could be instead saying, yeah, I I I know that that my prescriptions makes a certain kind of trans people appear. I know that I'm creating the trans person that uh, like I know that I'm basically imposing my notion of trans people because uh, well because I well there are more complicated reason, but like I'm evil or something. I uh, I want I think there's only one way to be trans, and I'm gonna make sure that people act that way. Uh,
Yeah.
kind of people who want straight gender roles. Uh, which to me makes like the big papa fascist perspective on the issue makes it a makes it make makes a bit more sense uh because he wants to impose gender role. He knows that those are in the end nonsensical, or maybe like he doesn't know isn't conscious of the fact, but is like uh, it informs his positions. But he he wants to normalize the world. He wants to make the world more simple.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and transmedicalism is a way of making trans people more simple without like saying the bad thing, like the we gotta make them disappear altogether.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
depending on how deep you go, some like a lot of trans medicalist orgs will just say we should get rid of trans people.
well, I mean, by
Not
getting rid
cate-
of trans people, like assimilation or straight up.
well, or by like desistance and conversion therapy. Like there are some orgs that support that.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't really be
I mean,
transmedicalism. It would
it's
just be
not, yeah, it's not really, but it's like nominally, like they present themselves as transmedicalism, but
mm,
it's just kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
yeah, yeah, like yeah. It's just a first. Well, it's like their foot in the door. Now that I control the narrative around trans people, like I
Mm-hmm.
can go further towards erasing them completely.
Yeah. The other big thing I took away from that essay is that like, and I guess I'm just restating something I already said, but
Hmm.
that the relationship between trans people and the medical industry that it's describing creates this feedback loop where they're producing the outcomes that they're looking for because
Yeah.
they know what they're looking for, so they're just going to act the way that they want them to act. So they're not actually finding anything. They're just creating. They're just like creating something.
Yeah. Sorry. I, do I is my microphone sounding fine because uh well
Oh, chat. How's it sound? Too loud? Too quiet? Uh, it sounds okay on my end, at least through my headphones.
yeah, well, like sometimes my microphone bugs out and like has like background noise for
Okay,
apparently no reason, but it seemed to be fine. Okay. Um.
sound is good.
So yeah. Uh. Do you want to keep me uh uh? th- It sounds a bit sticky. It's
Pardon?
oh, Rusty a robot said that it sounds a bit sticky. Okay, yeah. Okay. It might be better now.
Okay.
So do you want to keep me on to look at the things uh, uh you wanted to look at,
Um,
or
I'll probably unless you have like more thoughts, specifically, I'll probably drop the call for now.
all right.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
oh
really
well.
appreciate your perspective though. Like, thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad. Uh, I have an opportunity to talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um.
Yeah, I really appreciate
Uh,
outside perspectives.
yeah. Enjoy the rest of your stream.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, do you want to call in too, Rusty? You can. Absolutely, yeah. Um, are you on Sunday's Discord? You could like find me on there. Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, sweet. Uh, yeah, I don't know. Listening to this is like reminding me of the Keffels and Xanderhall situation, and I'm not going to talk about them that much because I already
Yeah,
rant about them to my friends all the fucking time.
like is that
And,
like the they fab thing or something else?
uh,
Or
it's the transmedicalism thing and how Keffels kind of misrepresented what transmedicalism was at one point when she was
okay, yeah,
talking about Brianna Wu, you know?
yep, yeah. I
And
covered a little bit of that.
kind of snaky to me. I don't know for sure. Maybe she was just incorrect, but you know, it just felt too convenient at points.
I think she was
Uh
playing dumb.
I know, right? That was so oh god. So basically, one thing I really fucking hate, and it was something Xanderhall was talking about, and I noticed you made a video, so I don't know how much I'll actually add. Let me know if you want me off. Uh, I really hate the whole dysphoria being a necessity to
Yeah,
be trans or get bottom surgery or transition, because like take it out of like this could lead to like them arguing like, oh, it'll just make you more dysphoric, or it's a huge decision. It's like, yeah, but I think it shows this weird limitation of thought with people like this, because I feel like one thing I've learned over time, ever since I started coming out more, you know,
mm-hmm.
like I started coming out because of people like Vosh, basically. Uh, like I started listening to his debates on trans people, and I was like, oh shit. And one thing I learned by watching his debates was how un not unreal, but how much of a farce the concept of gender is. And if we all truly believe that gender is a farce, then
Yeah,
the idea of needing dysphoria means that uh, is basically implying that there is a true gender, or that if you change your body, then you become while you're not dysphoric, and then you become dysphoric, implies that you are no longer in the correct body, which then implies that there is such thing as a correct body, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. I think I understand what you mean.
Like, and like I subscribe myself as a transhumanist,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Meaning I believe, like, we are not limited to the bodies we are born with. There is nothing wholesome, or I guess wholesome, about what we were born with. So I just get annoyed with this whole necessity for and prescription. Like, even I've even had to deal with my own psychologist telling me about this, of telling
Mm-hmm.
me that if I transitioned, I'd probably become dysphoric because I'm no longer in the right body. Which I led to that with just her not knowing better. And she even suggested later on I started seeing a trans therapist. I was like, yeah, probably. um, I guess that's all I really have to say. I guess this was more of me ranting, but
Yeah, that's totally cool. You're
I
totally good.
I think it worries me when people like Keffels and Xanderhall talk about this, because I find shit like that. Like I'm under the impression that Xanderhall doesn't really believe in anything, probably more so than Keffels. I've noticed patterns where he would wait to make statements until after someone else has already made someone, that other people perceive as reliable, or that he's in a friend group with, already makes that statement. Then he tries to make the statement on his own as if he thought it up, you know? Uh,
Mm, yeah,
I don't,
it's something
I
I've
don't know.
noticed.
So,
It's
okay, so I'm not crazy, right?
no, yeah,
Like,
it's it's kind of the same thing that Keffels does, where like they'll take
Yeah.
a position just
They'll
because
wait
it's
till
something.
Bosch talks about it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't know if
Like,
Vosh will
what?
talk about it.
No. I don't even think Bosch pays attention to that as much.
No, I don't think so.
I think it, because like the more Vosh like talks about stuff, the more I'm like, oh wow, you really are like kind of in your own world, honestly. And I don't mind that. It's just I've started noticing stuff like that over time. That I've tried to be like, oh well, you don't know for sure. And it was until Xander Hall defended Keffels in the NAFAB debate
Mhm.
by lying what happened in that debate that I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, he just
That
seemed
kind of
like
just
so.
confirmed everything.
He seemed
You
so
know?
disinterested in actually knowing the contents of that debate in the first place. He just kind of jumped to conclusions there.
God, I fucking hate that debate. I hate that debate, and I remember even talking with Keffels about it. And each time I was talking about like, yeah, she'd be like, "Okay, I don't think DayFab is good," and I'd be like, "Okay, so then why do you not like the Anvil thing?" And then they'd be like, "Oh, well, because I know other people that have said it." And I was like, "Okay, where'd you learn it?" And she'd be like, "Oh, like 12 years ago, I knew a person from a group who had a person that was pretending to be trans so they could become president of an LGBTQ group." And I'm like, what? What? Like, it was just like fucking was it when you make something up? Like antidotes. Or I guess yeah, antidotes
Yeah.
that from personal experience that wasn't actually like
Oh,
evidence
yeah,
for
anecdote.
validating
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah,
also,
like it's nothing you could actually prove either. Sorry, keep going.
I don't know. It's just really weird. It was weird too how she was like, "You need, how many trans women do you know?" As if that was like who the slur was targeting.
Right. No, yeah, it was clearly also something that was clearly like targeting a very specific group of people that wasn't even trans women. It was
Yeah.
like it was clearly targeting like, you know, female born people too, for the most part.
No, yeah.
I mean, I
It would be
guess there
like
might be a day mab.
it's like if somebody
Like,
was
I don't know.
defending. It's like if somebody was defending the T slur, and then somebody was like, "Oh well, how many biological women do you know?"
No, I think it's also probably like if someone was defending the yeah, I guess so, yeah. I guess I was gonna say same thing, but cis people. It's like how many cis people you know. It's like this is an
Yeah.
entirely different group we're talking about, or like how many black people you know. Where it's like this is
Yeah.
an entirely different group we're talking about right now. What are you talking about? Like Jesus, I I didn't mean to come on here and just rant.
Nah, that's cool.
I just really liked listening to this because I have came out as trans for a bit. And I think one thing I wanted to talk about is it's okay if I talk about stuff in my life involving being trans because I think it has something to do with this.
Sure.
Is what this will be like kind of I'll try to keep it brief. One of the annoyance about newly coming out as trans. And this is something
Oh wait, one sec.
that
I just wanna clarify something for chat. I was yeah, I wasn't using the term like unironically. I was biological woman. I was saying like as if I was like a turf or something. Just to clarify.
yeah. Yeah. I've thought about trying to like thinking of saying another word besides they fab because I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know. It's like when you're trying to say, like, talk about the N word, and instead of saying the N word, you say, well, you know, the N word.
Um,
But I guess it's,
maybe.
I don't know. I guess it's not as serious of a word,
Yeah,
but,
I think it's okay to use referentially, but I would be open to arguments otherwise. Like I could
yeah.
certainly I could certainly be open to changing like to using some other referential word.
How about, wait, I'm not biologically female. I was gonna pull the, well, I'm trans card. But that's a whole other conversation. So, but
Yeah,
under the
there's
annoyance
no
of
such
coming
thing
out,
as a biological woman. It's a silly term in the first
women
place.
are real. I'm not real. I only chose women because I like being fantasy creatures. That's why I came out as a woman. Uh, um, one of the annoyance about coming out as trans, and it's something that's not really anyone's fault but the brain, is when you come out and everyone's trying to get used to your gender, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are referred to you as this or that, and for the most part, you'll know like, well, they're getting used to it. But then there will be people in your life that, but then like there's always this problem I have where I feel like I'm not passing enough, you know? And it's like each day it feels like it's my fault because I forgot to put on makeup that day, or because I don't have enough feminine clothes, which my mom bought me a gift card to buy more feminine clothes, which I need to do that soon. But I mean, either way, I guess it kind of adds to the argument a bit more, even though I do want to pass more. Uh, but I'm just wondering, like, what's a way to like help get past that phase, like mentally, while everyone else is trying to be able to adapt to this without, I don't know, breaking down.
I
We're starting to
wish
get mad.
I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah, that's fair. How would you come? Are you trans at all, or are you just
Yeah, I'm non-binary.
ally?
I consider myself agender.
Yeah.
I'm not really out like in my public life or anything. Just kind of just online mostly. But
God, it took me like a year to come out.
yeah.
Like
So I don't have a
it
lot
didn't
of
hit.
like lived advice or anything to offer, unfortunately.
No, no, you're totally fine. It's just nice talking with other trans people more,
Hmm.
you know. Uh, yeah, I don't know if I have much more to say. I'm sorry for if it's most of me just rambling.
No, it's all good.
Uh, but listening to this has just been nice, and I guess I just wanted to talk about this with someone else that is a bit more knowledgeable on these subjects. But thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for calling
Uh,
in and sharing your
yeah,
experience.
if I have anything more important to say, I guess I'll let you know.
Okay,
Have a good day.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.